I was hired as her assistant. By the end of the month, her mother believed I was her secret wife, and I did not have the heart, or the courage, or maybe just the good sense to tell her otherwise. That was later. On the morning it started, I was standing in a hallway that smelled like money, holding a resume printed on paper too thick for the printer at the library, watching 11 other applicants glance at my cardigan and decide everything about me they needed to know. The cardigan had been my grandmother's. Gray wool, a darned patch at the left elbow where the yarn had worn through twice, mended twice, the second time by me with thread that didn't quite match. I wore it because it was warm, and because the woman who knitted it used to tell me that anything built to last didn't need to be beautiful, it needed to hold. I was 26 years old. I had $411 in checking. A sister named Tamsin, whose hospital bills had eaten every raise I'd ever gotten before I could feel it land, and a folder of forged confidence I was about to walk into a boardroom and spend like it was real money. Vantris Maritime took up 11 floors of Harrow Point Tower, and the woman who ran it had a nickname the financial press used so often it had stopped being an insult and become a brand. They called her the Wall of Harrow Point. Analysts said it like a compliment. Employees said it like a warning. I had read 4 profiles of Coraline Vantris the night before the interview, and every single one used the word cold, and every single one buried, 3 paragraphs down, the fact that she had taken over the company at 29, 2 weeks after her father was found dead in his own harbor office, with the books cooked around him by a partner he had trusted for 11 years. Nobody wrote about that part with any feeling. It read like a footnote to a stock price. The recruiter who'd walked us in barely looked at me. "Assistant to the CEO," she said. "Temporary contract, 6-month trial. And I want to be honest with you people, she has fired 3 assistants this year, so if you are looking for stability, this is not that." A woman beside me in a blazer that cost more than my rent laughed under her breath. I did not laugh. I had learned a long time ago that the people who laughed first were rarely the ones still standing at the end. We were 20 minutes into a written assessment, a spreadsheet full of shipping manifests and customs codes we were meant to reconcile, when the room's temperature changed. I felt it before I understood why. Every head turned toward the glass doors, and a man in a gray suit came through them at a near run, saying the words quarterly board deck and corrupted and 40 minutes into the same breath, and behind him came a tall woman in black, who did not run, who did not need to, because the room simply rearranged itself around her the way water rearranges itself around a stone. That was the first time I smelled her. Spruce needles and struck steel, cold and clean and faintly like the moment right before a storm breaks. I did not know yet that I would spend the next 2 months learning to read that scent like a second language. I only knew that every other applicant in that room went quiet at once, the way people go quiet in a church, and that she crossed to the head of the table and said, in a voice pitched low enough that everyone leaned in to catch it, "Whoever finishes first gets the job. Whoever finishes correctly keeps it." Then she looked directly at the recruiter and asked how a file with 3 redundant backups had managed to corrupt itself 40 minutes before a board vote, and nobody in the room had an answer for her. I had an answer. I did not raise my hand, because raising my hand had never once worked out for me, not in school, not in any job I'd held since. I simply pulled the tablet toward me, opened the raw export beneath the broken formatting, and started rebuilding the pivot by hand, while the woman beside me was still highlighting cells in yellow like that was going to fix anything. It took me 11 minutes. I know because I counted them, the way I count everything, because counting is the only thing that has ever made panic feel survivable. At minute 11, I slid the tablet toward the man in the gray suit and said the customs codes were double-entered under 2 different vendor IDs. It wasn't corruption. Somebody merged 2 files that shouldn't have been merged, and the software choked trying to reconcile numbers that already didn't reconcile with themselves. The room had gone very quiet again, differently this time. I looked up because I could feel eyes on me and found the woman in black already watching, and understood in that exact moment that being seen by Coraline Vantris felt like standing in a doorway with the wind changing behind you. Name, she said. Not a question. Nothing about her was ever a question. Wren Calloway. You caught what 4 accountants and a compliance team didn't catch in 3 days. It wasn't kindness that made her say it. It was recognition, and recognition, I would learn, cost her far more than kindness ever did. Why? I didn't have a rehearsed answer for that. I had only the true one. Because nobody taught me to trust the summary. People built the summary. Numbers don't lie, but people rounding them do. Something moved behind her eyes, fast, gone before I could name it. Come with me, she said, and turned, already walking, already assuming I would follow, which I did, past 11 applicants who were still holding their pens like the test wasn't already over. It was. It had been over the second she walked in. I found out later that the file hadn't corrupted itself. Someone on the finance team, a nervous man named Petrov, who reported. It would turn out, to nobody good, had merged 2 vendor accounts under pressure from a board member trying to bury a shipment discrepancy before the quarterly vote. I didn't know that yet. I only knew that I had walked into Harrow Point Tower as a temp with $411 and a mended cardigan, and I was walking out of that boardroom as the personal assistant to a woman the financial press called a wall, and that her scent was already sitting somewhere behind my sternum like a struck match I hadn't asked for. You'll start tomorrow, she said at the elevator, not looking at me, looking instead at her phone, already 3 crises ahead of the one we just solved. HR will send paperwork. Do not read it carefully. It will only depress you. A pause, so brief I almost missed it. The elevator to my floor requires a badge. You'll have one by morning. What if I'm bad at the job? I said, because I have never once in my life known how to accept a good thing without interrogating it first. She looked at me then, fully, the first time she had, and I registered the shape of her the way you register weather, all at once and completely. You reconciled 6 months of shipping fraud in 11 minutes. While wearing a coat with a hole in the elbow, you clearly mended yourself rather than replaced. Her mouth did not smile. Something underneath it did. I don't think bad is a category available to you. The elevator doors closed on her before I could think of anything to say back. I stood in the lobby a long moment with my grandmother's cardigan pulled tight around me and the ghost of spruce and struck steel still caught somewhere in my chest, and I thought, with the particular dread of someone who has been disappointed by good news before, that I had just walked directly into the kind of story that ends badly for people like me. I was right about the ending being large. I was wrong about badly. The tower swallowed me whole the next morning, and it did not do it gently. My badge let me on to the 38th floor, into a glass office suite where the carpet alone probably cost more than my last apartment's entire security deposit, and the first person I met there was a beta woman named Marlo Beck, Cora's chief of staff, who looked me over once, top to bottom, and said, 3 assistants this year. You'll last a week if you're lucky, less if you cry in front of her. She said it the way you'd warn someone about weather, not as cruelty, just as forecast. I don't cry at work, I said. Everyone says that. Marlo handed me a stack of folders thick enough to stop a door. Everyone's wrong. I did not cry that week. I did learn, quickly, the geography of Coraline Vantress's world and how little of it resembled mine. Her penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building 2 blocks from the tower, all glass and pale stone, and a silence so complete it felt curated, the kind of quiet that costs more than shouting. My studio, 6 blocks further out than I could comfortably walk in winter, had a radiator that knocked twice before it decided to work, and a window that looked directly into someone else's kitchen. I did not resent the gap. I cataloged it the way I catalog everything, because understanding the size of a thing was the only way I'd ever learn to survive standing next to it. The insiders sneered exactly the way I expected. A junior VP named Dahlia asked me, in front of 4 other people, whether I'd been hired for my numbers or for something else, and let the pause after something else do the rest of the talking for her. I didn't answer. I have found that silence, held long enough, embarrasses the person who threw it more than it embarrasses the person who caught it. Cora didn't apologize for the tower, and she didn't perform kindness at me the way some powerful people do, in loud gestures meant to be witnessed. She did smaller things. The second week, she noticed I'd skipped lunch 3 days running, chasing a supplier audit she hadn't even asked for, and without comment a container of soup appeared on my desk at 2 in the afternoon, still hot. From a restaurant I'd mentioned once, in passing, as the place my mother used to take me and Thompson when we were small, and the diagnosis hadn't come yet, and neither had the debt. I hadn't told her the restaurant's name. I'd told her the dish. She'd found it. "You don't have to do this," I told her, holding the container like it might be a trick. "I'm aware." She didn't look up from her screen. "I'm doing it anyway." The clues about her started accumulating the way clues do when you're the only one in the room paying attention. A framed photograph on her desk, turned slightly away from visitors, of a man with her exact jaw dated 9 years back. A locked drawer she opened once, by accident, in front of me, containing nothing but a single folded shipping manifest gone yellow with age. The way the entire floor's temperature changed whenever her mother's name came up in a meeting, the way weather changes before a front arrives. I filed all of it. I did not ask. Some doors, I had learned early, you wait to be invited through. The first charge touch happened on the emergency stairwell, of all places, during a fire drill nobody had warned me about. I missed a step near the landing, and she caught my elbow before I understood I was falling, her hand closing around my forearm with a grip that could have crushed stone, and didn't, careful in a way that felt more intimate than force ever could have. For 3 full seconds, neither of us moved. Her scent, spruce and struck steel, wrapped around me on the stale stairwell air, and beneath it, for the first time, I caught something else, something warmer, banked low like a coal under ash. "You're not wearing proper shoes for stairs," she said, releasing me exactly when I'd found my footing, not a second before or after. I wasn't planning on falling. Nobody plans on it. A pause, her eyes on mine a beat too long to be professional. That's rather the point of a fall. I didn't know what to do with the way my pulse behaved after that, so I did what I always do with things I don't know what to do with. I filed it and went back to work and told myself it meant nothing, right up until the evening 3 weeks later when Marlo burst into my office without knocking and said, "Her mother's in the building. She's coming up. She was not invited, and she does not care." I asked what that meant for me. Marlo's face told me before her mouth did. "It means," she said, "you should probably not be sitting at her desk in her sweater when Vivienne Vantress steps off that elevator, but it's already too late to fix that now." I looked down. I was, in fact, wearing Cora's spare cardigan, the charcoal one she kept on the back of her office chair for the nights the building's air conditioning ran too cold. because mine had gotten soaked in a sudden downpour on the walk over, and she'd handed it to me without a word an hour earlier, the gesture so unremarkable to her, so enormous to me, that I hadn't thought twice about still wearing it. I was surrounded by 3 months of shipping ledgers spread across her desk like a woman who lived there. A pot of tea sat cooling between 2 cups, because she liked her tea exactly 4 minutes steeped, and I had learned to time it without being asked. The elevator chimed. Vivienne Vontress came through the doors like weather that had made up its mind before it arrived. A woman built from the same iron as her daughter, but polished into something colder, a scent of cold rain and old money trailing behind her. She stopped in the doorway of Cora's office, took in the tea, the ledgers, my borrowed sweater, the soft low lamp Cora always lit instead of the overheads when it was just the 2 of us working late, and her whole face changed. Some long-held tension in it easing for the first time in what looked like years. "Coraline," she said, and her voice cracked slightly around the name in a way I hadn't expected from a woman built like a closed door. "You didn't tell me you'd found someone." Cora, who had come up the stairs a half-second behind her mother, froze in the doorway with a stillness I would come to recognize later as the exact stillness of a person deciding in real time how much of the truth they can afford to spend. "Mother," she said, carefully. I know who she is," Vivienne said, crossing the room, taking both my hands in hers before I could stop her, her cold rain scent washing over me, her eyes bright and wet and entirely, devastatingly certain. "I know exactly who she is. Look at this room. Look at how she has arranged your desk. Nobody arranges a desk like this for an employer." She turned to her daughter, and her voice, when it came again, was thick, with something that had been starved a long time and had just, without warning, been fed. "You found your wife, and you didn't even tell your own mother." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. I counted them, the way I count everything, because counting was the only thing keeping me upright. Cora did not correct her. I looked at her, waiting, certain the denial was coming, certain any second now she would say the obvious true thing, that I was her assistant, 6 months, temporary, that her mother had made an enormous and understandable mistake. The words did not come. Instead, Cora crossed the room, slow, deliberate, and settled one hand at the small of my back with a warmth that did not match the ice in her public face at all, and said, in a voice that carried just enough conviction to sound rehearsed and just enough hesitation to sound like it wasn't, "I was going to tell you properly. At dinner." This wasn't how I wanted this to go. Vivienne did not seem to hear the strain in it. She heard only what she had wanted to hear for what I would later learn was 9 long, grief-soaked years, and she pulled me into an embrace that smelled of cold rain and relief, and said, into my hair, "Thank God." I thought I would lose her to that wall she built and never see anyone get past it. "Thank God, it's you." Over her mother's shoulder, Cora met my eyes, and in them I saw an apology and a plea and something else I did not yet have the language for, something that would take me the rest of this story to name correctly. "There's a gala," Vivienne said, pulling back, already reaching for her phone, already planning, the transformation in her so total it was almost frightening. "The Draycott merger dinner. Saturday, you will both come. I will finally get to introduce my daughter's wife to people who have spent 9 years telling me she'll die alone behind that desk." She kissed my cheek, cold rain and triumph, and swept back toward the elevator without waiting for either of us to object, already dialing someone, already saying the word wife into the phone like a woman testing a coin she'd been saving to spend. The doors closed. The office went silent except for the tea going cold between 2 cups nobody was drinking anymore. "I am so sorry," Cora said, the moment the elevator had fully descended, her composure cracking down the middle in a way I had never once seen it crack in 3 months of working 12 feet from her. I should have corrected her immediately. I don't know why I didn't. I did. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, mostly because I wasn't sure I trusted the answer. "Why didn't you?" I asked anyway, because some part of me needed to hear her try. She was quiet a long moment, turning her back to the window, the city lights catching the sharp line of her jaw, spruce and struck steel gone faintly warm underneath, like a coal that had caught after all. "Because my mother has spent 9 years grieving a husband and planning a wedding for a daughter who told her, repeatedly, that love was a liability she couldn't afford. Because Celine Draycott's family has been circling that gala for a merger disguised as a marriage for 2 years, and my mother has been too tired to fight them off alone. Because for 1 entire minute, she turned back to face me, and her voice, when it came, had lost every trace of the wall of Harrow Point. She looked happy. Actually happy. And I have not been able to give her that in 9 years, and I am ashamed of how badly I wanted to let it stand, even knowing it was a lie. It has to end at some point," I said. "The lie." "I know." She looked at me the way she'd looked at me on the stairwell, the moment before the fall, the moment nobody plans for. "Will you give me the weekend?" "1 gala. I will find a way to tell her the truth after. I will not ask this of you beyond Saturday." I should have said no. I had $411, a sister with a hospital bill that grew interest faster than I could pay it down, and a 6-month contract that this exact kind of chaos could end in an afternoon. I said yes anyway, and told myself it was for the paycheck, and did not examine too closely the way her scent had gone warm in the 2 feet of space between us, or the way some traitorous part of my chest had already started rehearsing the word wife like it belonged to me. The gala rehearsal happened in her penthouse 2 nights later, both of us standing too close in front of a floor-length mirror while Marlowe fed us biographical details we were meant to have memorized about each other, my grandmother's cardigan folded over a chair because Cora had insisted, gently, that I keep it nearby even though I wouldn't wear it Saturday. "Anniversary," Marlowe said, flipping a page. "You need one. Something specific." Vivienne will ask, and she remembers everything. "Why March?" I asked. "Because it's the day you rebuilt 6 months of shipping fraud in 11 minutes, and I decided I did not want you working for anyone else." She said it flatly, an accounting entry rather than a confession, and then seemed to hear herself say it and went very still, the way people go still after admitting something they hadn't planned to admit. Marlowe, mercifully or not, chose that exact moment to excuse herself for a phone call, leaving the 2 of us alone in a room lit only by the city outside the glass, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off her. Close enough that her scent had stopped being a wall and started being an invitation. "For the gala," she said, low, "we should probably know how to stand together, how to look like it's real." "Probably," I agreed, and did not step back. Her hand came up, slow, giving me every chance to move away, and settled at my waist the way it had at the small of my back in front of her mother, except there was no audience now, nothing to perform for, and the hand stayed light anyway, careful, asking a question with pressure instead of words. "Tell me to stop," she said, "and I will." "I'm not telling you to stop. That's not the same as telling me to continue." I looked up at her, at the line of her jaw gone soft in a way the financial press had never once photographed, and understood, with a clarity that felt like falling and being caught at once, that I did not want to be careful about this the way I was careful about everything else in my life. "Then I'm telling you to continue," I said, and she closed the distance the rest of the way herself and kissed me like she was asking a question she already half knew the answer to, gentle at first, restrained. The restraint itself the most devastating thing about it. And I felt it land somewhere under my sternum where the struck match scent of her had been living for months, and something in me that had been braced for 3 months finally, quietly, let go. We broke apart when the elevator chimed. Neither of us moved fast enough to make it look accidental, and Marlowe, coming back through the doors, took one look at us and said, dryly, "In 9 years, I have never once seen her cancel a call to rehearse a cover story. I'm starting to think this isn't a cover story," and did not wait for either of us to answer before disappearing back down the hall, leaving the question sitting in the room between us like something neither of us was ready to pick up yet. The gala arrived with a countdown I could not stop counting. 6 days. 3, 1. By Saturday evening, I stood in a dress Marlowe had procured that fit like it had been made for a version of me I hadn't met yet, my grandmother's cardigan left folded at home for the first time in years, and I felt, walking into the Draycott ballroom on Coraline Vantress's arm, less like an imposter than I had expected, and more like someone standing exactly where she'd been meant to stand all along, which frightened me more than the imposter feeling ever had. The wound tending had started 2 nights before the gala, quietly, in the kitchen of her penthouse, over a pot of soup she had, to my genuine astonishment, made herself, badly, the recipe clearly followed from a phone screen propped against the tile. "You said this was your mother's dish," she said, not looking at me, focused entirely on not burning the bottom of the pot. Before the diagnosis, before it all got complicated. I mentioned it once, weeks ago. I remember things people mention once. She said it like a confession, which I would come to understand. It was. It's the only skill I have that isn't measured in shipping tonnage. I sat at her counter and watched her fail gently at cooking, and something in my chest that had been guarded since the day my father left and my mother started working 2 jobs to cover what he'd left behind simply came undone. My father used to say, "Count twice. Cut once," I told her, apropos of nothing, apropos of everything. About wood, originally, he was a carpenter before he wasn't anything at all. I use it for numbers now. Check the total twice before you trust it. "Is that why you don't trust good things?" she asked, quiet, sliding a bowl toward me. "You're waiting for the second count to prove the first one wrong?" I didn't answer, because she'd found the exact shape of the thing I hadn't said out loud to anyone. Not Josie, not Tamsin, not the 3 therapists I couldn't afford to keep seeing. She reached across the counter and covered my hand with hers, her scent gone warm and close, no struck steel left in it at all, only spruce and something underneath that I was starting to recognize as simply her, unguarded. My father died because he trusted a man for 11 years who was stealing from him the entire time, she said, and I went very still, because this was the locked drawer, the yellowed manifest, finally opening itself without me asking. My mother built a doctrine out of the wreckage. Control is survival. Never let anyone close enough to see the books. I believed her for 9 years. I built a company and a reputation on believing her. Her thumb moved once, slow, across my knuckles. Then a woman in a mended cardigan looked at 6 months of fraud and told me numbers don't lie, people rounding them do, and I have not been able to stop thinking that maybe I built my entire life on a rounding error. "That's not nothing," I said, my voice thick, "what you just told me." "No," she agreed, "it's the whole invoice. I don't show anyone the whole invoice. People leave once they see the whole invoice," I said, quiet, an old bruise finally spoken aloud. That's been true my whole life. My father left. Every job I've had left me the second they'd gotten what they needed. I'm not leaving. She said it like a fact, not a promise. The same way she'd once told me bad wasn't a category available to me. I have seen the whole invoice for months now. I am still here. The kiss that followed was slower than the first one, less a question and more an answer, and it might have gone further, both of us leaning into a warmth that felt inevitable, had my phone not lit up on the counter between us with a text from Marlowe. 3 words long, that ended the evening before it could become anything more than it already was. Celine's here early. We broke apart, breathing hard, the soup forgotten and scorching faintly on the stove behind her, and Cora's face did the thing I'd come to dread, the wall reassembling itself plate by plate over the woman I'd just watched come completely undone. She's not supposed to be here until Saturday, she said, already reaching for her jacket, already becoming, in the space of 4 seconds, the CEO the financial press had built a legend out of, instead of the woman who'd just told me about her father's murder in her own kitchen. I should have known, watching that transformation happen in real time, exactly how fast it could happen again, and in which direction. Celine Draycott arrived at the gala wearing a smile so perfectly calibrated, it took me a full minute to understand it as a weapon rather than a courtesy. She was beautiful in the specific, engineered way of women raised to be assets, and she moved through the Draycott ballroom like she already owned every square foot of it, which I would learn before the night ended. She very nearly did. "So you're the wife," she said to me, over champagne, her voice sweet enough to disguise the poison until it had already gone down. "How lovely." "Cora's never mentioned you in 2 years of board dinners. Not once. It's almost like you appeared exactly when this merger conversation got serious." She smiled wider. "Almost like magic. Almost," I agreed, and did not give her anything else to work with, because I had spent a childhood learning that the people who wanted your reaction most were the ones you starved of it. Vivienne, radiant in a way I hadn't seen her since the office, floated through the ballroom introducing me to board members and old maritime families, as though I were a prize she had personally recovered from some long, cold war, and every introduction landed like a stone in my stomach, because every single one of them was going to be a lie I'd have to walk back eventually. Cora stayed close, her hand at my waist all evening, and every time Celine's gaze cut toward us, I felt the grip tighten, protective, deliberate, a message aimed somewhere past me. The confrontation came at 11:47, and I know the time because I looked at my phone the second before everything fell apart, an old habit, checking the hour like counting kept the ground steady beneath me. Celine found me alone near the terrace doors, Cora pulled away by a board member 3 minutes earlier, and she did not bother with sweetness this time. "I know exactly what you are," she said low, for my ears only. "A temp. A placeholder. The kind of woman companies forget to pay overtime because nobody thinks to look twice at her. I had this merger secured 18 months ago until you showed up with your thrift store cardigan and your sad little story, and Vivienne fell for it like the desperate old woman she's become." She smiled, and it did not reach anywhere near her eyes. "I wonder what the board will think when they learn your background check has 3 discrepancies in it. I wonder what they'll think when they learn about the $40,000 that moved through your sister's hospital account and back out again in a pattern that looks remarkably like structuring." I felt the floor tilt. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will," she said, sweetly, and walked away, and I stood on that terrace with the harbor wind cutting through a dress that cost more than I'd made in 3 months, and understood that whatever came next was not going to be gentle. It was not gentle. It came 6 days later, in the middle of a Tuesday. In the form of an emergency board session Cora had not called and could not stop, an anonymous packet delivered to 7 board members and the financial press simultaneously, alleging that Wren Calloway, personal assistant to the CEO, had falsified her employment background and engaged in suspicious financial transfers consistent with laundering hospital funds through her sister's accounts. My name sat in a headline by 2 in the afternoon. By 3, HR had summoned me to a conference room with glass walls facing the entire 38th floor, so that everyone, Dahlia included, could watch through the glass as I was walked through an internal investigation like a woman already convicted. Cora was not in the room. Cora, I learned from Marlo, ashen-faced in the hallway, had been pulled into an emergency session with the board and Celine's father, both of them pushing hard for my immediate termination, framing it as a liability the company could not risk during merger talks. And the wall of Harrow Point, for the first time in 3 months, had gone entirely, publicly, professionally cold. Not at me, at the situation. But I did not have the vocabulary yet to separate the two, standing in that glass room being asked to explain $40,000 I had, in fact, moved, every cent of it legitimate. Every cent of it documentation I did not have with me, because nobody had given me an hour's notice to defend a life I had spent years building out of exact change. By 6 that evening, I had been placed on unpaid leave pending investigation. By 7, I was in my studio apartment, the radiator knocking twice like it always did, folding my grandmother's cardigan into a box along with 3 months of borrowed hope, telling myself I had known, somewhere, that this was always going to happen. That people like me did not get to keep things like this. That the whole invoice always came due eventually and I had simply forgotten, for one reckless season, to keep counting. Cora texted 4 times. I did not answer. I told myself it was self-preservation. It was, in truth, simple fear. The oldest kind, the kind that says, leave before you can be left, and I packed my apartment with the particular efficiency of a woman who has done this before and expects to do it again. I was wrong about most of it, and I found that out the hard way, at 11 at night, with a box half-packed and Josie sitting cross-legged on my bed telling me I was an idiot for not answering my phone when someone knocked on my door hard enough to rattle the frame. It was Cora, still in her boardroom clothes, tie loosened, hair coming out of its pins, spruce and struck steel gone sharp with something I hadn't smelled on her before, something close to panic. You didn't answer, she said, and for the first time since I'd met her, the wall of Harrow Point looked less like stone and more like something that had been standing so long it had forgotten it was allowed to crack. I figured you had enough to handle without me, I said, which was a lie, and we both knew it. I resigned from the merger committee 2 hours ago, she said. I told the board that if Celine Draycott's family wants to weaponize a forensic accountant's own competence against her as proof of guilt, they can find someone else to run this company through a deal built on that kind of rot. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see her hands shaking. Actually shaking. This woman who had never once, in 3 months, shown me a hand that wasn't perfectly steady. I have spent my whole life believing my mother's doctrine, that control is survival, that you don't let anyone close enough to see the books. You looked at my books the first day I met you, and you were the only person in 9 years who told me the truth about what you found. I am not letting Celine Draycott take that away from either of us because it's inconvenient for a merger. She has evidence, I said, my voice breaking on the word. Real transfer records. It looks bad, Cora. It looks exactly as bad as she wants it to look. Then we prove it isn't, she said, because you are the best forensic mind I have ever put in front of a spreadsheet, and I refuse to believe you can't find the truth in your own bank statements as fast as you found it in mine. I looked at her, at the half-packed box behind me, at Josie pretending very hard not to be listening from the bed, and felt something in my chest that had been braced for months finally, fully let go. "Count twice," I said, wiping my face, reaching for my laptop instead of another box. "Cut once." We worked through the night in my cramped studio, the radiator knocking its rhythm behind us, and by 4 a.m. I had it. The thing Celine's forged packet had been counting on nobody looking closely enough to find. The $40,000 had not moved suspiciously at all. It had moved through my sister's account and back into a hospital's own reconciliation system, because the hospital had double-billed her, and I had spent 8 months fighting to get a refund processed. Documentation for every cent sitting in an email folder I hadn't thought to mention, because it was, to me, just the exhausting shape of being poor and sick in a country that made you prove your own suffering twice, but buried in the same transaction records. Cross-referenced against the packet's own timestamps was something else entirely: 3 transfers from a shell account tracing back, through 2 shell companies, and a numbered account in a jurisdiction that did not answer emails, directly to Celine Draycott, the exact amount and timing of a payment made to the man named Petrov, who had accidentally merged 2 vendor files the day I was hired. She hadn't just tried to frame me. She had engineered the original fraud, years ago, the one that had nearly sunk the company before I'd walked in and caught it in 11 minutes, and used the chaos of nearly being caught to manufacture a crisis that would let her push a forced merger through a frightened board. "She's been bleeding this company for 2 years, I said at 4 a.m, staring at the screen, my hands finally steady. The fraud I caught on day 1 wasn't random. It was hers. I just got there before it finished. Cora went very still, reading over my shoulder, spruce and struck steel gone sharp and cold again, but a different cold now, not the walls cold, something with teeth in it. "I want to destroy her," she said, quiet, and I believed her completely. "I know," I said, and put my hand over hers before it could close into the fist it was already forming. "But we do it with the truth, in front of everyone, and then we let the board and the law finish it. Not you, alone, in the dark, becoming the kind of person your mother's doctrine made you afraid of becoming. That's not a version of you I want to keep." She looked at me a long moment, something in her face breaking open and settling back together differently than before, softer at the edges. "You're the only person who has ever stopped me instead of pointing me," she said. "Everyone else in my life has always been so eager to point." The emergency board session convened 41 hours later, in the same room where I'd been quietly dismantled 6 days earlier, except this time I walked in beside Cora instead of behind a glass wall, wearing a tailored charcoal suit she had, without asking, without making it a thing, had made for me overnight and left folded on my studio's one good chair, with a note that said simply, "You don't have to wear armor that isn't yours, but you should have some that is." My grandmother's cardigan I kept in my bag. I did not need it that day. I had learned, finally, what it felt like to walk somewhere already armored. Celine arrived expecting a firing squad aimed at me. She got, instead, a projector screen with her own shell company routing displayed in exact, uneditable, time-stamped detail, every dollar counted twice, cut once, laid out in front of the same board she had spent 2 years cultivating. I did not raise my voice once. I did not need to. Numbers, delivered plainly, have always done my shouting for me. "This is fabricated," Celine said, too fast, the sweetness gone entirely from her voice for the first time since I'd met her, something crude and cornered showing underneath it. "She's a temp with a grudge. She probably built this hole. The routing predates my employment by 14 months, I said, and let the silence that followed do the rest." It was Vivienne, seated at the head of the table, cold rain scent gone thin and sharp with fury, who finally spoke into the wreck of that silence. "You let my husband's death sit unsolved for 9 years," she said to Celine, her voice shaking, "while your family circled my daughter like carrion, waiting for her to be desperate enough to sign a merger you'd already stolen the foundation out from under." She stood, slow, every inch the matriarch the maritime world feared. "Get out of my family's boardroom before I have security remove you, and pray the fraud division finds you before I do." Celine did not manage a full confession, not at first, the way villains sometimes do in the stories people tell about mercy. She tried denial twice more, brittle and shrinking with every repetition, until the weight of 14 months of time-stamped theft finally collapsed the performance entirely, and what came out of her instead, low and venomous, was closer to the truth than anything sweet she'd said all gala. "You have no idea what it costs to be raised to merge, not marry," she said to Cora to the room. To no one in particular. "I did what I was built to do. I just did it better than either of you noticed until it was too late." Security walked her out 4 minutes later. Nobody stopped her from taking her coat. Nobody applauded either. I felt Cora's hand find mine under the table, not performing anything for anyone this time, and I let her hold it and did not once check the clock to count how long it lasted. The board voted unanimously to reinstate me by end of day, with a formal apology I did not particularly need, and back pay I very much did. But it was 3 nights later, on the penthouse terrace, harbor lights strung out below us like something counted and accounted for, that the thing I had actually been waiting for happened, quiet and unhurried, the way the truest things in my life had always turned out to be. "I told my mother the truth," Cora said, watching the water instead of me, her hands loose on the railing. "All of it. That the wife was never real. Not at the start. That I let her believe it, because for 1 minute she looked like a woman who still had something to hope for. And I couldn't bear to take it back from her." My stomach dropped. "What did she say?" She said. Cora turned to face me, something unguarded and terrified, and entirely sure moving across her face all at once, that she didn't care how it started. She said she has watched me for 3 months become someone she thought she'd lost the day my father died, and she doesn't need it to have been true from the beginning. She only needs it to be true now. She reached into her jacket, and I understood with a lurch that had nothing to do with fear this time, exactly what was in her hand before she opened it. A small velvet box holding a ring far simpler than anything her family's money would have suggested. A thin band, a single stone, understated in a way that felt, instantly, like it had been chosen by someone who had actually been listening. "I am asking you properly this time. Not for my mother. Not for a gala. Not for anyone in that boardroom." She knelt, right there on the terrace, the wall of Harrow Point, on one knee in front of a woman who 3 months ago had $411 and a mended cardigan. "Wren Calloway, I have seen your whole invoice, every line of it. I am not leaving. I would like the rest of my life to be the proof of that, if you'll let it." "Ask me properly," I said, my voice breaking, an echo of a rule she'd taught me on a stairwell months ago, one I had learned to live by since. "With your words." "Marry me," she said, plain, unadorned, the most honest sentence I had ever heard her speak. "Bond with me. Let me claim you the way I should have claimed you the first day I decided I would burn a merger to the ground before I let anyone take you from this company, or from me." "Yes," I said, and she was up and across the distance before the word had finished leaving me, and this kiss was neither question nor careful restraint. It was answer, full and certain. Her hand finding the curve of my neck with a tenderness that made the coming claim feel less like a bite, and more like a promise finally being kept. "Tell me to stop," she murmured against my throat. Later, her lips at the exact place where the scent gland sat, warm and racing under her mouth, spruce and struck steel gone entirely to something molten, and I will, even now, even here. "Don't stop," I said, and meant it with every honest number I had ever counted, and she claimed me there on the terrace with the harbor lights spread out below like a ledger finally balanced, her teeth closing gentle and sure over the mark, and the bond opened between us like a door I hadn't known was still shut, warmth flooding through it that was entirely, unmistakably hers. We were bonded properly, with vows 6 weeks later, in a garden behind Vivienne's coastal house, small and warm and nothing like the gala that had nearly ended us. Marlowe stood as witness on Cora's side, saying, when asked to speak, only that in 9 years she had never once seen Coraline Vantris wait for anyone, not for a meeting, not for a storm, not for a ship coming in, and that she had waited 3 entire days once, patient and terrified, outside a hospital room, the week Wren's sister had a procedure neither of them could control. And that was the day Marlowe had finally believed the wall had a door in it after all. Josie cried through the whole ceremony and denied it loudly afterward. Vivienne wore the same cold rain scent she always did, but softened now, worn easy, and she held my hands the way she had that first night, and said only, "I knew it before either of you did. Mothers usually do." Celine Draycott was indicted 11 weeks after the board session, the fraud investigation turning up 2 more years of embezzlement across 3 companies. Her family's shipping empire dissolved into settlements and shame within the year. Petrov testified against her in exchange for a lighter sentence and left the industry entirely, which was, everyone agreed, the least anyone owed the company for what nearly happened to it. Dahlia, the junior VP who had asked her cruel question in front of 4 colleagues, resigned quietly a month later, unrelated, everyone said, though nobody quite believed that. A year on, we live in an apartment neither of us calls a penthouse, though it technically is one, in a building close enough to the harbor that I can hear the ships some mornings from the kitchen, where Cora has gotten marginally better at cooking my mother's soup, though she still burns the bottom of the pot exactly every 3rd try. My grandmother's cardigan hangs on a hook by the door now, instead of folded away in shame, the old patch at the elbow joined by a second one, small and neat, in thread that matches perfectly this time, stitched by hand one quiet evening while I slept, by a woman who apparently keeps a sewing kit in her desk for exactly this kind of listening. Tamsin is well, the hospital bills long since settled, and she visits most Sundays, teasing her sister-in-law mercilessly about the ledger she keeps of every promise she has ever made and kept, a habit Cora has, against every expectation, come to love in me instead of merely tolerate. This morning I woke before her, the way I sometimes still do, unable to fully believe the quiet is mine to keep, and found the light coming pale gold through the harbor window, laying itself across the bed the way it does every morning now, and Cora still asleep beside me, one hand loose over the mark at my throat even in sleep, as if some part of her is still standing guard over the invoice she chose to keep in full. I used to believe that people left the moment they saw the whole truth of you, the unpaid debts and the mended coats and the years spent invisible in rooms that never once thought to look twice. I have learned the slow and difficult way that some people see the whole invoice and simply decide, with their whole chest, to stay anyway, and that being finally, completely seen costs nothing at all compared to what it gives back. The end.